So I don't like covering bad news right before going on vacation, but I think it's time we all have a talk about Anthem's slight player base problems. I thought that after the new update and the new stronghold would go live, the numbers would grow a little bit and stabilize higher, but it seems quite the opposite is happening, and now the player count is dropping much faster than before. In fact, by all accounts, it's lowest it's ever been, and so is the viewership. On the Xbox One, for example, on the top 48 played games, Anthem is about to completely drop out of the list with barely 2 spots until that happens. On the PS4, even though there's no official metrics to follow, there's people now reporting that the game feels like a complete ghost town, and on the PC version, which I also play on, well, let's just say that I can attest it's getting harder and harder to matchmake with people. There's even news coverage on this very fact, and it looks like anything outside Grandmaster 1 Heart of Rage, which is the go-to farm method for most players, is completely deserted. This might all sound like anecdotal evidence to many of you, but feel free to check all of these sources, even add Google search data in the mix, Twitch and even YouTube viewership, and you will pretty much have the clear picture. Speaking of Twitch, if we give a few more days, I think Anthem will reach the same number of views on Twitch as the original Mass Effect game, and yes, I'm talking about the first one, not even the second, the third or Andromeda. And Bioware's silence, lack of important changes, and the now indefinitely postponed roadmap does not help with that one bit. Well, there's a new shop reset if you really want to go into the technical details, so I guess that counts as a somewhat new update. But yeah, there's just a couple of new items in there, and that is pretty much it. Outside of that, things aren't looking that good right now for Anthem, and I doubt at this point that EA will just stand by and let Bioware burn the whole thing down. And the saddest part about this is not even the fact that Bioware is unwilling to change things, which I'm sure they are in certain aspects, as much as it's about their inability to do so. Maybe it's a combination of both, I don't know, it's really hard to even make an opinion right now, since their employees would rather post about their experience playing other games rather than covering Anthem, a game that it's still in development and it's still something that they are working upon or allegedly working upon. It's this silence and the fact that they're ignoring their fans which makes me believe Anthem is way too far from getting properly fixed, so even 6 months to fix Anthem seems optimistic right now. To give you a contrast and a better understanding of how things should have been dealt with, recently we had another Mortal Kombat game which had its fair share of criticism caused, well, obviously by the massive levels of grinds needed to get gear and the huge amount of bugs. Again, the same kind of stuff we have dealt with in Anthem. Not 1 week after that game launch, those developers already came in with a big update that not only addresses many of the game-breaking bugs, but also does so with the loot problems. The latest patch MK11 had more than doubled, in some cases even tripled the rewards, making the game not feel like a complete grind fest. And not only that, the developers have also rewarded their player base with in-game currency to spend it in-game and to compensate them for the amount of frustration and the wasted time they had to deal with. So yeah, MK11 already had plenty of content in it, but it didn't matter if the experience wasn't satisfying and rewarding enough to the players. This example couldn't have come at a better time, because for a long time it's been said that before the lack of content, Anthem already has a big problem on its head, and that is of course the lack of proper loot. The latest patch is the best example in this regard. We had a new stronghold which felt more entertaining than most of the previous ones. It had, a lot of stuff to do in it, but most of the excitement went down the drain because there was nothing to reward you for your time. Yes, you might take a couple of runs to see what it is all about, but what then? What would you do after that? Of course, you wouldn't do anything because there's nothing rewarding you properly, which means you would do one of the two things. You would either go back to your most optimal routes, which would be in this case Heart of Rage on Grandmaster 1, or you would completely abandon the game. This is what most people did. They either went into the one or the other, and very few are left doing the other type of activities in Anthem. Like, just try any activity on Grandmaster 2 or even 3, try any other stronghold rather than Heart of Rage, and you will see how hard it is to matchmake with other people. You might find another person or two, but almost never will you find a full group of people, unless of course it's like peak hours in your region. It's ironic when you think about it that the only feature players were ever excited for after the game's release was a bug, and of course here I'm referring about the 10-hour windows we had when the loot actually felt rewarding. Every new update Bioware creates is another exercise of unintended results. Time after time again, they release a new patch that promises to fix existing bugs, and it does so, but in the process it also brings a few other on top of that. So now we're stuck with a permanently bugged game that always has something wrong going on with it. The latest patch made no exception, and there's a lot of documented bugs associated with it, which makes it really hard to properly enjoy the game since they're quite major, like for example always dropping connections from the server, not having reliable stats on the items, and there's a ton more on top of that. If bugs can't be fixed in a timely manner, the least they could do is bump up that loot. We know that the content is not gonna drop anytime soon, so at the very least give that as an incentive for players to continue playing. As someone perfectly put it in a recent thread that got a ton of upvotes, what would Bioware even lose if they did that? What is the point of even being so stingy with the loot? For a lot of the players who abandoned the game weeks before, loot would be the only thing bringing them back, and would be the only thing that would keep them going. Well, that at the very least until some new content comes up, but in the meantime some better loot would definitely help. At least people would see more reasons to play. Just from my perspective, for example, I could have covered way more builds on this channel if I had reliable loot drops, but I didn't, and I'm pretty much stuck with the same builds that I had 2 months ago. The only thing that changed is that I get a few upgrades here and there once a week, but that is pretty much it. Anyway, there was another player-based survey last week, even though it's only been conducted on Reddit, and even though that is the case, I think it still correlates with what we're currently experiencing with the game. At least half of the player base or the respondents have not touched the game in over 2 weeks, and only like 15 to 20% of them have played more than 20 hours in the same time frame. Oddly enough, unlike other failed games, Anthem would be able to bring many of those players back, according to the survey, if the updates are good enough. And when taking a glimpse over the updates itself and what people would want to see in them, we have the loot drops at the top, or a better loot system. This has been the highest upvoted, as well as more content, and in terms of more content, that means more stories, more dungeons, or well, strongholds, more missions, and so on. That is what people want. Bug fixes and all of that is the least of players' concerns right now. The same goes with the question if Anthem can be fixed. Only 16% see it as unfixable, while the rest are pretty much divided between yes or maybe, with the overwhelming majority in the yes category. Again, the game has some cool core concepts that do a great job at getting people hooked, but without a line to follow, there's no reason to stay, so that is why we see this huge drop-off. People don't really find a reason to stay after being initially drawn in. Add to that the fact that now it's looking like authorities are gonna get involved with this whole crunching hours problem that most EA studios and even most gaming companies have. This might be more than a bump in the road in the not so far future for both Bioware and EA. If Bioware is already stretched thin with their current teams, which could barely keep up with the content while being severely overworked, there's no telling what kind of delays future updates might see. It's the same old you can't do 7 years of work in 12 months talk we had, in the previous videos, and that can't be good news for the game. The way I see it, Bioware is already on borrowed time. I already said this in the past, and I've said this before many times. I'm not sure how much this will continue though, but with the game already dropping way below the $20 mark in certain places like Amazon Mexico, I can't see it happening for far too long. A reminder for those who played Mass Effect Andromeda, this is exactly what happened a few years back with that game. A few months of silence and semi-regular bug fixes, no new content, and then complete silence, with the game of course being completely dropped off and the project put on ice. Of course, the reasons are now different, but does it honestly matter if the results are the same? I don't think it does. And we might very well see Anthem being put on ice in the same way that Andromeda did, simply because Bioware can't keep up with the demand and with what needs to be added in this game, and not only added, even fixed. Anyway, that is it for now. As I've suggested in the beginning of the video, I'm going to be out of town for a few days, taking a break from YouTube and just relaxing for a little bit. So yeah, I'm gonna take a vacation up until Sunday or probably next Monday. In the meantime, of course, if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up would be super appreciated, and I will see you guys in the next video.